is that's actually needed to make early generation seed systems work for dryland cereals and legume crops such as sorghum, millet, groundnut, chickpea. And we'd like to understand what those business models are that could underpin EGS provision of some of these less market-oriented crops. What are the key gaps and constraints? And most importantly, what kind of novel innovations and investments, whether they are technical, institutional, policy, or market related, could be adopted to close these gaps and strengthen EGS provision and distribution? Welcome everyone. My name is Boudi van Schagen. I'm a Senior Advisor Agriculture and Seed Systems at the KIT Royal Tropical Institute here in Amsterdam and the Netherlands, and I will be moderating this session with you today. Maybe just a couple of housekeeping points. We will start with a few short presentations. After the presentations have been completed, we will allow for a couple of burning clarification questions. Please, for all requests for clarifications, please submit them as chat messages. We'll keep an eye on those. Post in the chat at any time, state your question, and also the name of the speaker who would you like to respond to your question. Once we have finished that, so we're through about the halfway point of the session today, we will open up the floor for your audience input into possible game-changing innovations that could help strengthen EGS production and supply. Over the course of the session, please post all of your comments into the chat, your contributions. If you would like one of the speakers to respond to your contribution, your comments, please put the speaker's name there also. And I guess then, without further ado, in order to set the scene for us this morning or this afternoon, I would like to welcome Chris Ojewo. Chris is Principal Scientist and Theme Leader for Seed Systems with the International Crops Research Institute for the Semi-Arid Tropics, also known as ICRISAT, and he's based in Nairobi, Kenya. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you very much, Boudi. And I'll just run through a few quick slides to put a general note on issues related to early generation seed business models. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I think before we take a deep dive into interventions that are ongoing and those that we may want to suggest, one of the key things that we want to look at are the challenges. And I think some of the key challenges in the EGS is related to basically the whole value chain, looking at first at the varietal characteristics that I would want to emphasize that unless we start with good varieties, then we have the two ends of the balance not moving, that is the supply end versus the demand end. But then of course, along the value chain, we want to ensure that we sustain and maintain good seed quality, which comes very easily and perfectly if we have very strong maintenance breeding, not necessarily development variety in this case, but proper maintenance breeding to ensure that the quality is sustained. But of course, in all these things, while we do our work in ensuring that the seed supply is maintained, we also want to ensure that the cost issues that were mentioned in earlier presentations are taken care of, especially from the side of the demand end of the people who receive the seed, that they don't purchase the seed at extremely high costs. Timeliness in the supply of the seed is critical. And of course, not just timeliness, but also sustainable availability, so that at the time that is needed, the seed is available. Next, please. And so some of the interventions along these have involved several approaches, but one of them is basically for all these approaches, our focus is to ensure that there is a strong commercialization pathway, for which my emphasis has been that if you don't work on the commercialization pathway and the seed production or the variety development remains at more or less subsistence level, then the EGS models, the EGS value chain does not really work efficiently unless we have a commercialization drive. That requires that the public and private sector have strong technical and business acumen, and that there is a strong value in terms of robust data that is available to the investors, the seed investors in terms of quantity and in terms of quality of that data, so that if they're making a choice to take up a variety and to produce the seed of that variety, then they're certain that they're not making a wrong choice. And of course, importantly, also is a clear path of handover between research and the seed systems, particularly for the publicly developed varieties, that is not necessarily always very clear in terms of variety registration, in terms of variety licensing, and all these factors that then enable sustainable seed production and supply. Next, please. Next, please. And so with that background, we would like to hear from some of the panelists this afternoon about some key issues around seed, EGS, seed production and supply, but also on the other side, the demand end, so that we complete the chain. Helen will be telling us about Helen Opia. I think maybe she'll be introduced again by Bodhi. But Helen Opia will be telling us about EGS business models under context-specific conditions. And then we have Steve van der Merwe, who is again, I think Bodhi will do a further introduction, who will be guiding us through the EGS demand forecast and its role in sustainable commercialization pathway. Then we have Tekmo Chagamoka, who will take us through how the EGS value chain actors are working to ensure that there's customer satisfaction, which is pretty critical, particularly with regard to quantity of supply, the quality of the seed, the timeliness, and the cost when the customers do receive the seed. And from all the participants, one of the things that we want to clear as we wrap up at the end of the day is looking at all the EGS discussions of today, and from your own experience from elsewhere, what would you consider as a game changer, where would want to focus to ensure that we translate and transform the current narrative of EGS, because it's so much of a perennial problem and we need a solution? What do the participants think would be a game changer in the African context? Over to you again, Bodhi, and thank you for your attention, everyone.
Super, thank you very much, Chris, for helping to set the scene for us for this afternoon. Let me now invite Helen Opia to present. Helen is a socio-economist and research scientist with the National Agricultural Research Organization, better known as NARO, in Uganda. And she's also a PhD student at Makerere University, looking into business models for EGS. Helen.
Thank you, Bodhi, for the introduction, and Chris for setting the scene. Let's go to the next slide. So we did a study of about 13 business models that are applied in sub-Saharan Africa, majorly in Eastern Southern Africa, and then Western Central Africa. And these were models that could be categorized into three groups: the public sector-led models, and then the private foundation seed companies, and then models that involved public-private partnerships. So we basically set out to learn from their experiences and their approach in ensuring that they ably supply foundation seed to their clients. And from what we gather already, actually, and given the context of the environments in Africa, we can't say that one model will fit, can easily be applied in one country, because these countries have very unique environments. But what was clearly coming out is that these models, even though some of them appear to be working very well, they do still have gaps, which perpetuate still the problem of early generation seed supply. And I'd like to highlight these gaps, and one of them is the breeder seed quality. Most times this is lacking, and this has fostered the the certified seed producers or the foundation seed producers to venture into, again, cleaning and purifying these materials. And then also this foundation seed doesn't come at the time when it's needed. And this is because the NAS, the EGS producers, there's a lack of, there's a disconnect between their planning with the clients. So most times the NAS produce very, very small quantities. And so when the demand comes, they're not able to supply the required amounts. And then also, most of them lack the seed production infrastructure. And this is in terms of irrigation systems to ensure that they're able to produce all year round. And then also the storage facilities for long-term storage, and ensure that the maintenance of seed quality is ensured. Some of these institutions do have, but in most cases they are inadequate. And then of course also, most of these models are increasingly employing outgrower schemes to produce the seed, this being seen as a rather cheaper approach to produce than producing these foundation seeds on the research stations. But then it's very costly to maintain this, having to move very large distances, they are outspread. So the question of supervising them and also seed certification systems also becomes very costly. And then of course also the seed market system, there are a lot of vagaries. There's a lot of uncertainties. You don't know how much seed is needed. I mean, with the context of development agencies involved in livelihood activities where they're increasingly working, dealing in supplying of seeds, and you don't know when these programs start. So those vagaries actually affect the planning of EGS production. Next slide, please. So what would work best, really? And we think that an integrated approach would work, whereby we borrow some of the best practices in these models in different countries, and those that work best, that can fit in a given country. And one of them addressing the issues of financing, for example, which is a big problem with the NAS, for example, who rely a lot on donor funding. So one of the approaches that they're applying is to employ a seed revolving fund mechanism, whereby the proceeds of the sales from the seed produced is plowed back for operations of EGS production. And another approach to financing is getting involved in public-private partnerships, where you have the private sector driving production, providing some financing to support the EGS producers to produce this, with of course the ensured offtake of the grain at the end of the chain. And then of course, another important thing that needs to be addressed is the establishment of a seed production infrastructure to ensure that seed is produced in the required amounts and at the required time, and also of good quality. And then of course also we can look into providing incentives for the private sector to get involved in the production of some of these seeds, given their lack of economic, viability. I mean, it's not interesting the private sector so much in terms of economic value coming from them. But we can provide some incentives, for example, in form of non-exclusive rights, whereby you just have a small percentage going back to the breeding program to support maintenance and production of EGS. And then also another incentive is to develop very favorable regional market policies so that we widen the market opportunities for these actors, given the nature of these crops. You can't only focus in one country, for example. And then of course, another incentive, for example, that works best with the outgrowers and the private sector could be intertwining seed production, together with soil health management. For example, Quali Basic Seed in Kenya and Zambia actually apply this approach whereby they produce common bean as a secondary product, where maize is the primary product, whereby the common bean is just planted as a crop rotation crop to maintain soil fertility. But at the end of the day, the seed company gets these seeds to sell. And of course, also the outgrowers also get the benefit of having their soil fertility enhanced. And then of course, the need to innovate for demand forecasting, which seems to be a challenge that is really, really persisting. And one of these innovations we see in these models is the pre-order system, whereby the foundation seed client makes a pre-order for the seed needed together with an advance payment. So this ensures that the seed producer produces the required amount and also has the incentive to produce this seed, given that already an advance payment is done. And then also there's a need to intentionally produce more than the market needs. But this goes hand in hand with investing in long-term storage facilities. I thank you so much for your attention.
Helen, thank you so much for sharing those interesting insights and the learning from the 13 different cases, business cases that you looked into. I will now, well, just before I give the floor to the next participant or next speaker, just a reminder that if there is something that strikes a chord with you in these presentations, something you agree with, something you disagree with, something you think that may have been forgotten, please do post it in the chat, because the second half of this session is dedicated to an exchange of different perspectives and different ideas around game-changing innovations. But for now, let me give the floor to Steve van der Merwe. Steve will be discussing the importance of seed demand forecasting. Steve's an independent consultant specializing in EGS, and he works with the Syngenta Foundation for Sustainable Agriculture. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you for the introduction, Baudi, and good afternoon to everybody attending the conference today. Well, today I'm talking about a topic which I really feel very passionate about, and I truly believe that if we get demand forecasting right for EGS, a lot of the recurring problems that we see today in EGS would be solved. I know it's quite a bold statement, but I truly believe that. Next slide, please, Baudi. Maybe before I start, my slides are quite rich in content, but I did this on purpose so that the audience, in their free time, they can go through this. You know, there's a lot of things around demand forecasting which I felt is important. I'm not going to go through everything, but for the benefit of everybody, I've included a lot more than I can talk about. Demand forecasting is basically about mobilizing the actions or getting you to mobilizing yourself to do things right now to make sure that you, you know, that you are ready when the future comes with your product. So it's about, you know, bringing the future into the present so that you can do something about that, you know, as the quote says there on top. Demand forecasting is much more than just about estimating you know, your future demand. You know, there's a lot of things, different things involved. This is also about bringing teams together, making sure that teams are aligned. So it's not a process where somebody goes into a dark room, one person goes into a dark room, they come up with a number. This needs to be a team effort between different departments. It's also about balancing your demand and supply. And as I've said already, this is all about collaborative demand planning. It's not a one-man job. Next slide, please, Baudi. The only thing I want to highlight on this slide is, you know, is the quote there at the bottom, and you know, which basically state that without proper demand planning, you can predict with certainty that there will be misalignment between different parties of, you know, departments within a company. There will be much more wasteful use of resources. There would be missed opportunities, lower profit margins, and happy customers. That's something you can predict with certainty. And demand forecasting is much more than just sort of a very high level fluffy number that you come up with in terms of, this is the volume of seed that would be needed for the next year. It takes a lot of effort. Next slide, please, Bardi. The reason why I included this slide is basically just to highlight that demand forecasting is not a simple process. As I've already said, that with certainty you can predict that if you don't do it, you will fail. You will be, wasting resources. You will create unhappy customers. But it is not a simple process. Multinationals in sort of a multinational seed company, who's basically everything is internally, it is quite a complex process that stretches over 3 to 5 years. So if you take that into consideration and you think about the African context, where demand forecasting is not only about one seed company talking with all the different departments within one company, sometimes this stretches over multiple role players that's involved. It is a complex process. I think one thing that's very important to remember on this slide is, this is sort of a non-negotiable. In any private seed company or any seed company where you want to make sure you keep your customers happy, is not negotiable. There should always be enough EGS to produce your certified seed, or enough, early generation seed to produce your basic seed. EGS should never be the limiting factor that prevents you from selling what you predict you can sell. Next slide, please. As I've already sort of alluded slightly to this, I'm not going to talk too much about this slide. The only point I want to make here is that on the previous slide, I've sort of given a glimpse on how private seed companies do this, but unfortunately, it's not as easy as just sort of a simple copy paste of what multinational seed companies are doing into sort of what's happened in the African context, because there are quite a few things which is different. I think the important thing that I want to highlight is that even though the business environment is different, the principle still stands that EGS should never be in short supply. The next slide, please, Barney. So maybe just if we look at if we do sort of a reality check today and see where, so where are, I guess, the African seed businesses with their demand forecasting. Reality is, it is not an efficient process where you deploy, where there is a well balance between your demand and supply. EGS is frequently in short supply. We know there are several studies. I've been involved now, in this EGS space in Africa for just about a year, and I know there has been several studies done on trying to come up with solutions, business models, whatever, to try and alleviate some of the issues that we have with the short supply of EGS. So this is a problem that's been reoccurring for quite some time. Unfortunately, the sad reality is also that over the last couple of years, not much has changed. So we've been talking a lot about EGS being in short supply or some of the issues related to that, but nothing much has changed. And then this is the solution that I want to offer, and this is probably something that I would like to hear from the audience on how they think about this. But I really feel that, or believe that, the solution in balancing your or doing a proper demand forecasting to get your sort of a sustainable seed business up and running lies between partnerships. Remember what I said in the beginning, this is not somebody that goes into a dark room. So I personally believe in the African context, this is about partnerships between the government, who sort of provides through the knowledge, the early, the breeder seed, seed companies or the industry. There needs to be much more trust between parties. There needs to be rigor and discipline installed in the process, and there needs to be elimination of the current value erosion within some of the crop seed systems. And with that, I'll pass it back to Baudi. Thank everybody for your attention, and thank you for the opportunity to present this at the conference.
Thanks very much, Steve. Great presentation. And I think we can now, or a nice takeaway from your presentation indeed, is that EGS should always be available, and indeed that's a non-negotiable must. Very nice. Our next and final presenter is Dr. Tekmor Chagamoka, who is the regional manager at Seedco West and Central Africa. So looking forward to your perspectives, Tekmor. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Baudi, and hello, everybody. I think let's move to the next slide. So to kick off the presentation, I want to discuss, who are these EGS value chain actors? So we do have private seed companies. We have got some seed companies running their own breeding programs. They've got a set of breeders so they can produce the ECGS and then also give to their production departments to produce finally the certified seed. But we also have got EGS private companies, for example, Quality Basic Seed in Kenya. We also have the LCIC in Ghana. Those are upcoming EGS seed companies specifically producing ECGS to supply various stakeholders, private seed companies to produce the certified seed. But we also have got public research institutions, for example, NARO in Uganda or MOFA here in Ghana. They also have got some public breeding programs where they develop public varieties and they produce the EGS to sell to private companies, probably under licensing or some contractual agreements. Another set of actors, they are international research institutions. A good example is the ICRISAT or CIMIT or IITA or World Vegetable Center. These are also running various programs to develop public goods through using the funds from the development partners. And to a certain extent, they also produce the EGS and make them available to the private sector to produce the certified seed. NGOs also play very critical roles, especially in community-based seed production systems, where the communities are producing seed and then sell to the farmers. Development partners, as I've just said, plays also a very critical role in terms of supporting and funding some of these activities. Next slide, Board. So in this slide, I want to discuss a little bit in detail what are these actors doing actually to satisfy the customers. So I want to start discussing in terms of quantity. Production forecasting, as it's been indicated by previous speakers, it is very critical because if we are to attain the right quantity, we need to forecast to know what quantity do you want when. Otherwise, we'll end up without enough quantity of the EGS on the market. But of importance also, it is actually the type of varieties as far as seed yield is concerned. Some varieties, they've got low seed yield, such that if you want to attain certain levels of quantities of the EGS, it takes years and a lot of planning. So the next point is quality. What can be done to ensure quality? The use of modern production technique will actually help in this regard. For example, we know now that previously people used to do hand harvesting of some of these EGS, but I think the use of modernized, for example, combine harvesters would help, or shellers, which does not lead to cracking of the seed, or some sorters, color sorters to make sure that the quality is of better quality. So the third point I want to discuss is about the timeliness. The timeliness, I think it is very important also to do production forecasting. Minimum, it must be at least 3 to 5 years production forecasting of your quantity you would want, so that those who are producing, it could be private EGS companies, it could be the public or the international institutions, they will know that by such a time we are going to supply company A with this quantity. So this forecasting is very critical. But of importance also, it's an issue of demand-driven production. So the companies will mostly produce based on demand. This is very important because sometimes storage, long-term storages are challenging in some cases. So you need to produce what you are going to sell. So the last point I want to discuss on this slide, it is cost. You know, low-cost production techniques are very important. I think all of us would appreciate that when we do our crop budgets, of importance, it is the list of inputs which are going to be involved in each production. So choice of inputs and also the use of mechanization would actually, to a certain extent, reduce the cost of production. We know previously, a lot of these activities were done manually, but with the introduction of maybe planters or use of machines to harvest, threshers, you know, color sorters to improve quality, while at the same time, we are also managing the cost. And the last point I want to discuss related to cost, it is easy to produce and high seed yield. You know, some inbred lines or some lines, parent lines of these certain varieties are difficult to produce. That itself will actually add into cost. And also, like what I said in my previous point, if the seed yield is very low of the inbred line, definitely it is going to increase on the cost. Thank you very much for listening. Next slide, Baud. I think this is my last slide. Back to you, Baud. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Chakamoka. Very interesting and good to have a bit more of a private sector perspective on these issues. Really good. That actually concludes our round of presentations. We've heard that there's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all model for EGS, and that all approaches have gaps. Thank you, Helen. We've also heard that EGS should never be in short supply, and indeed that a strong and trusting partnership between government and seed industry to build trust can be a good solution. And finally, we heard from Dr. Chakamoko that the sustainable commercialization of EGS needs to take into account quantity, quality, timeliness of delivery, and affordability. So thank you very much to all our presenters for those perspectives. Maybe this is now an opportunity to see if there are any clarifications required. I didn't spot any in the chat, so I think for most of you, the presentations were clear. Very happy to see that. Please do put your hand up if there are any burning clarifications before we move on.
Audi, I see quite a few questions in the chat.
Yes, but I think those are, I'm not sure that those are questions for clarification. There's a rather more these, I think we can discuss those in the next part. I may be mistaken. Let's start. Anyway, what we had in mind for the second part of this presentation is, now that we've kind of set the scene and given some interesting perspectives from different stakeholders, different industry representatives, research, we'd like to throw the ball back to you, the audience, and ask you, what do you make of these perspectives? And what do you think could be game-changing interventions or innovations for EGS production and supply? So how can we better coordinate EGS demand and supply? How can we ensure quality, quantity, timeliness of delivery, and affordability? And what are innovative and sustainable EGS commercialization pathways? What I propose to do is just to start maybe in the chat and work a little bit from top to bottom. So I think there was an interesting question from Michel Peters to Helen. And Michel, do you want to open up your mic and pose your question to Helen? I don't hear anything, so what I will read it, and maybe Helen, you can briefly respond. So Michel says, can exclusive rights not also be an incentive for for seed provision. For some companies, commercializing breeding materials temporarily or with spatially defined exclusivity can be an important incentive, and that makes a lot of sense. Helen, what is your response?
Thanks, Michel. Sorry, I think I agree with you, Michel, and that was actually also what I submitted in my presentation. Exclusive rights is actually a very good incentive for the private sector to get involved in production of EGS. What is important is to have very good systems in place whereby we have still the breeding program steering the whole process together with the private sector. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Helen. I think another good question is from G. Mauricio. I'm sorry, I don't have your first name there, but this was on the issue of digital seed production tools. Mauricio, could you maybe open up your mic if you're willing to and pose your question to Helen?
Hi, sorry to jump in. Bowdy, you need to let me know in advance who you want to give the ability to speak to. So people in the attendees aren't able to turn on their microphones. So if you give me the name of the person, then I can unlock their microphones.
All right. Okay. That is G. Mauricio. GM. First two letters, and if it doesn't, if he or she is not willing, yeah.
Hello.
Hello, welcome. Please go ahead, pose your question.
Thank you so much, Bowdy. Yeah, I think my question kind of cuts across almost all the three presentations. It seems like connecting, the demand and supply is kind of a big problem across the board, and it's really, really necessary for efficiency. And it could be like a game changer in this case of EGS if we can connect production and demand. And I was asking the feasibility of adopting these digital tools that have been developed to facilitate, to mediate the demand side and the supply side of EGS. What is the level of adoption of these digital tools, and what could be the factors that could hinder or enable adoption of these tools to enhance efficiency in the value chain of EGS? Over.
Thank you, Geoffrey. Indeed, we have those digital tools, the seed tracker, the seed roadmap. But I would say that these are systems that have just been, these are tools which have just been introduced. And I wouldn't say, much as I don't have the real statistic, that they are really, the adoption level of use of those tools is high at the moment. From the interactions I had, at least this was not something that was coming forth, despite the demand planning and forecasting being one of the key areas that we were investigating. But as you have actually pointed out, I think that is one of the key things that we need, maybe an action point out of this session that really needs to be paid attention to enhance and address the issues of early generation seed. Thank you.
Bowdy, if I may, can I come in here and give a little bit of insight as well? I think it's a very, very valuable question, and this is something that I've seen in my, from my experience, is that I think there's two sides of the coin, if I can put it this way. So digital tools, absolutely essential. It greatly helps with efficiency. It helps to reduce mistakes, quicker flow of information. All of those things are absolutely, essential, and digital tools can help a lot with that. However, what I think we need to go even a step further back than that. At the moment, if we put digital tools into the space where a proper process has not been established yet, they might fail as well. It's just another form of communication. So what you first need to do is you first need to make sure you bring the parties together, all the different role players with all the different generations of EGS that produces it. You need to make sure that they first start to talk to each other, and then the introduction of digital tools will greatly help to improve the efficiency of communication.
Thanks very much, Steve. I hope that answers the question. I have an interesting question here, Helen and Steve together, but take more, feel free to chime in. Let me just read it out. EGS is a major bottleneck for countries with fragile contexts, such as Mali and Niger. Good varieties exist, some national seed companies exist, and even cooperatives that produce certified seeds in these countries exist. It seems that pre-ordering system and some form of digital tracking would be useful to document the evolution of demand, which would help forecast demand. What do you suggest as a starting point to enable EGS to enable an EGS system to better forecast, encourage engagement of the actors, and increase efficiency? Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. And we can probably talk for an hour about only this question in terms of what is needed and what is not needed. I think the short answer to this is that, as I've said in my previous replies, it is about bringing parties together. Once again, digital and tools will greatly help to improve this, but this is about, so the first step in making sure you get your forecast better, your first step is to make sure that you understand who is involved, where in the chain of EGS productions, because what we have to understand in the African context is that sometimes there are up to 3 different parties actually involved in a specific, in the production of specific generations of EGS. If you compare that with a seed company, so, it's one seed company, it's only internal departments. And even in a seed company, just to give everybody an idea, in the private seed company, we used to meet every 10 days. We used to meet, within season, when we were producing EGS and commercial seed, there was a team of about 15 people that met at least every 10 days, just to make sure the communication flow was right, just to make sure that we balance the supply and demand. So I guess the answer is not a simple answer, but it's a complex process that need different teams to talk to each other.
Dr. Chukwuemeka, Helen, would you like to chime in?
No, thank you, Bowdy. Yeah, I think I agree with what Steve is saying. I had opportunity to work in Mali, so I actually relate very well with what the person is talking about. But I think the best, like what I've said, in simple terms, we need to make some plans, some projections, at least 3 years to 5 years plans of what we want to do as far as certified seed production is concerned, and then we work backward so that the information is passed accordingly to the producers of the EGS. For example, in Mali, possibly it will be coming from the national program. But I also know that some companies in the region, like LCIC from Ghana, they are starting to produce and sending seed as far as Mali. So it is an issue of demand forecasting, preparing our plans, at least minimum 3 years up to 5 years, and then the various stakeholders along the chain information is shared accordingly for planning and supply of the seed in time. Thank you.
Great, thanks. You're okay, Helen? Shall we move to the next question?
Yeah, I'm okay. I think we just move to the next, others I'll be repeating.
All right, that's fine. I had a question here, I think. Fred, Fred Ratunde. I don't know, James, if you're unable to unmute. Fred Ratunde. Fred, I can see you here. Would you like to pose your question or your comment? Still on mute, Fred. Okay, so Fred says he certainly agrees with Steve that the solution lies in partnerships. The various collaborative networks of farmer seed producer cooperatives and public breeding programs offer many advantages and warrants attention, as is exemplified by the Access to Seeds Foundation report, the rise of the seed producing cooperative in Western and Central Africa. Okay, so maybe there was a question there. I think Dr. Ojo, you are currently, I think you would like to pose a question. Can I ask you just to unmute your microphone and ask the question? Thank you.
Oh, yeah, thank you very much. Actually, I wasn't trying to ask a question. I think this has to be lowered. I mean, the hand has to be lowered. You know, I don't have any question to ask for now. Thank you very much.
Okay, misunderstanding, sorry, thank you. What else do we have?
Baudi, while you go through the questions, there was a very good question about, can we not open up these, EGS productions to the community and make it community-based programs, which I think is a great question. So let me give my perspective on this. People might think differently, but let me give my perspective on this. While I think this is a great idea, I think the important thing that we need to realize is that one of the key things that we see in Africa today is that the value that's certified, the value addition on certified seed versus just normal grain that people buy on the informal market is not that much. And there's many different reasons for it, which I'm not going to go into right now. But I think one of the first steps that we need to take towards improving the value proposition of certified seed is by ensuring good quality seed is provided to the market. So if you work the good quality seed back towards EGS, it is absolutely essential that your EGS seed that you produce is of good quality and purity, so that by the time that it gets to the market, it still keeps your purity standards. Therefore, so this is my experience is that within a seed company with trained agronomists that have with years of experience, we've actually gone to a state where we had specialized people. We did not even trust all the agronomists to produce EGS. It was such a specialized job that you give it to specialized agronomists only focusing on parent seed. And the reason for that is to make sure the quality is right. So to answer the question on this is, I think it's a good idea, but if you want to make sure the value proposition for EGS is right, you first need to do two things. It is not just something where you can hand a bag of seed to a community and say, produce it. You need to actively steer them. You need to actively train them. If you want to go down this route, which I'm not saying is impossible to do, then you just need to make sure that your support and your backup is absolutely there to ensure the quality of the seed. Otherwise, you're going to end up with certified seed where the value proposition is not that good. And then, of course, people would tend to go and buy seed on the informal market.
Thank you, Steve. Right, I'd see that we're nearly actually at time. Any final urgent questions? I can see a hand up, but I don't know who that is from. So what I suggest we do is I would like Chris, please, to just briefly synthesize what he's been hearing this afternoon. He's able to do so, and just to give his analysis of the comments and perspectives that have been provided. Chris, please.
Thank you very much, Baudi. probably want to share a screen because I've been capturing some notes, and just do that in a minute or so. No, I'm not allowed to share, so I'll still go ahead and then just speak verbally because of less than a minute. So a few key things that have been coming up, I think some of them have already been re-echoed by Bodhi. One of them is that one size does not fit all when it comes to EGS models. And that among the various models, it seems like there are always gaps. There is no model that is without flaws. So, and some of those flaws are filled by integrating several approaches depending on the context. I think that is one key big message I'm picking. And secondly is that demand focused is pretty critical, but I think more so I would re-paraphrase it and say demand creation, so that we have a seed supply that responds to seed demand, and that enables EGS to fit into the rest of the chain, because if there is no proper, there is no demand, then production alone does not necessarily mean we have a sustainable EGS system. The other point I picked is that we need a very strong value differentiation between seed and grain. And that is what has been put differently as value proposition for quality seed. Because if we don't have a strong value proposition for quality seed, then the seed actors, so to say farmers in this particular case, do not really see a reason why they should invest extra coin in purchasing seed, which they could otherwise get the same value by purchasing grain and planting. So a strong value proposition that I think fits fairly well also with developing a proper value chain in terms of the demand and the supply. So demand creation comes in here again. And with an assured demand, EGS should never be a limiting factor. I think that is the point, that EGS is only a limiting factor sometimes because the value chain is not properly developed. If you have a value chain where the grain demand pulls the quality certified seed demand, then EGS responds more or less automatically, and not, it shouldn't be a limiting factor, as has been emphasized by one of the panelists. A few quick points on quantity, quality, timeliness. One is that production planning, production forecasting, and proper choice of variety to be produced are both critical. And a selection of the approach of production technology would ensure that we have a good quality seed. Demand-driven production will enable us to have a timeliness. This goes closely with pre-order systems, so that we don't produce for the shelf, but we produce for a specific target. And we could reduce the cost of production again once the cost of seed through cost reduction of cost of production that involves selection of production approaches and choice of variety. I think a strong point has been mentioned about digital tools that include digital seed roadmap, so digital seed production planning, seed tracker to help with demand and production focus, but also that depends quite a lot on the context, especially on the two arms, demand and supply. Exclusive rights have been mentioned back and forth, but I think the emphasis I've sort of picked here is that it should be temporal and spatial. There should be temporal and spatial boundaries, time-bound exclusive rights, boundary or space-bound exclusive rights. So we don't just say exclusive rights, but with regard to time and maybe closely associated with the performance of whoever has the rights. And of course, I think final emphasis still recapping the same point of value proposition being the most critical thing to ensure that we have a sustainable EGS system. Thank you. Over to you again, Bodhi.
Fabulous, Chris. Thank you so much for that, that eloquent synopsis of this afternoon. Much appreciated. I think that concludes our session today on pathways for the commercialization of EGS. I'd like to say a big thanks to all of our presenters. Big thanks to the audience for your participation and your contributions. And just to note that we will be making a summary of this session and documenting it and making sure that's distributed to all participants in due course. So yeah, just to say thanks from myself as well, and wishing you a very enjoyable GSST conference. All the best.
Great, thank you very much, Boudi, and thank you to all of our panel and presenters for, again, a really interesting session. We're going to take a bit more of an extended break. So far we've been taking a 5 or 10 minute break between sessions. Now we're going to take about a 20-minute break. And when we come back, I should be sharing my screen actually. When we come back in about 20 minutes, we'll be having more of a synthesis session, an open discussion, when we'll be really looking at the game-changing innovations that we've been hearing about today, or trying to pick out game-changing innovations from the sessions that we've been hearing from today. That'll be an open discussion. Everybody, I really hope that you stay with us or go and stretch your legs, get a drink, and then come back. And that will be about a 45-minute session. So from in Netherlands time, Central European Summer Time, that's 3:15 until 4 o'clock, starting roughly in about 20 minutes from now. Thanks very much again to the panel and Boudi, and see everybody soon.